Welcome back to the Neuroblastoma Parent Global Symposium 2023. My name is Hayley from Solving Kids Cancer UK. I am also mum to Eva, diagnosed with neuroblastoma in 2014, and I will be moderating this session entitled Neuroblastoma Has Shaped But Not Defined Me. So this session will be delivered by two long-term survivors who I have had the privilege of meeting. And after speaking with them, I knew that they had to share their inspiring stories to a wider audience. And so I am delighted to introduce you to them. Tom Becker is a neuroblastoma survivor, diagnosed in 1992 from the UK, and has recently started to join the world of patient advocacy for better long-term follow-up care. Before I hand over to Tom, I'd like to draw your attention to the chat function on the right-hand side of the screen where you can submit your questions. There's the option to do so anonymously if you choose. Questions will be addressed after the presentations by both Tom and Tessa have concluded. So over to you, Tom. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Hayley. Thanks for such a lovely introduction and for the invitation to speak. It's a real honour to speak at an event where I know everybody listening and watching will have their own connection to neuroblastoma. And, you know, my story is just one amongst many. But I hope that the bits I've chosen to share, at least some of them will have some relevance and strike a chord with people listening. So I don't have any slides, but I do have notes that are down here. So if I'm glancing down occasionally, that's what I'm looking at. So yeah, I was diagnosed in 1992 and fairly immediately underwent treatment that included chemo, radiotherapy and surgery. And I really don't remember much of the treatment period itself, which I think presumably must be something that's fairly common amongst neuroblastoma survivors, being a cancer that tends to happen at a younger age. But I was quite young still when I think I became aware that the fact that it had been a significant thing to have gone through. And also that it must have been quite a difficult thing for my parents to go through, even if I didn't have much awareness of what was happening to me or the risk that I faced at the time. One way that came out was going for checkups. So in that sort of period immediately after finishing treatment, during those years of going for quite frequent checkups, to me, that was a great day out. I was taken out of school to go to the big hospital. I'd go to the waiting room where there were all these toys that I didn't usually get to play with, sometimes a Nintendo 64, which I was particularly keen on. And then I'd go into the consultation room and there'd be the doctor who would pay lots of attention to me. And almost I've got a memory, I think at least, of almost feeling like I was doing something right just by being there, just by turning up. And then afterwards, I get to choose a balloon from the hospital shop and take that back home. And so to me, this was like quite a fun day, not being in school, going for my checkup. But to my mum, I remember her telling me a little bit later on that she absolutely hated having to go for these checkups, going back to the hospital that I was treated in, that hospital smell sort of hitting her and the windowless corridors, going back to the ward and all of these things. So I could tell there was this ordeal that I'd gone through that I didn't have much awareness of, but that clearly had been a big deal for other people in my family. But for me, the significance really started after the treatment period, when the late effects that I was left with because of my treatment sort of kicked in. The surgery I'd had to remove the tumor had damaged some of the nerves that go to the gut and control speed of digestion. And so food goes through me much too quickly, and without medication, essentially, it's sort of chronic diarrhea, which in itself is obviously quite a sort of dangerous thing to have, and has its own medical implications. But with medication, it's something that improves, but certainly at the beginning and even today to an extent, it's not always perfect. The timing of the medication, the dosage, doesn't always do the job. And so I think early on, I knew that there was this thing that was perhaps slightly different to what other people experienced, that I had gone through something that was different to what most other children experienced. Apparently, on one of my first days at school, I was asking all the other kids what hospital they go to, because I assumed everyone went to a hospital. But I don't think I really had any thoughts beyond that. It was a physical condition that was sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes painful. I knew it wasn't something everyone had, but I don't think I really thought about it much more than that for a while. And then as I got a bit older, and I think sort of the self-awareness developed a bit more, I think I started to notice that actually there is a social impact to this late effect of my treatment, and that actually the condition I've got, when it's bad and when it's playing up, it's something that I perhaps need to be embarrassed about and need to try and hide from other people, and perhaps even a sense of shame around it if it was discovered. And so from that point, I think for quite a long time, the priority became hiding this condition. I've got something I need to cover up. And that worry of going into new social situations, lessons at school, friends' houses, sleepovers, whatever it was as a child, the primary thought in my head would be that worry around, how is my condition? Is it going to play up? Are people going to notice it? How am I going to deal with it if that happens? And that became quite a sort of dominant thought. On the whole, I kind of got through the rest of school without major incident. I think it was just there as a kind of persistent low-level worry and concern. And sometimes, the physical symptoms did cause me to need some time off, but nothing too bad. Other than, I think, that initial point where I'd started to have that understanding of this is something other people notice and might judge. And I had quite a long period off school. And I think it was just fortunate that came towards the end of primary school. And then things sort of reset a bit, it seems, before secondary school. And I started secondary school, different schools, some of the same students, but different classes. And that seemed to kind of make things okay. I think also just the increasing autonomy that I had of, you weren't necessarily just cooped up in the same classroom all day, meant that I felt I had a bit more agency to manage this condition. So I seemed to get through the rest of school all right. And actually, on the note of not being defined by neuroblastoma, while I was absolutely having to deal with these late effects, I did loads of things. I had loads of hobbies. I learned the violin like my two older sisters, started to learn the piano as well later on. I'd go on these music courses in the holidays and play music with other kids. I played tennis with friends every Saturday. We'd go to tennis coaching. I had a good group of friends throughout school. And so I seemed to be doing a lot of the things that I think every other kid was doing, that my older sisters were doing, things that I probably would have been doing regardless of having neuroblastoma. So I don't think neuroblastoma really defined or kind of constrained what I did through childhood, certainly at any point. And I think partly, at least, that's probably down to the approach my parents took, which was never to really start with the question of, oh, well, you were very ill and you've got this condition that's ongoing. And so, everything's got to be in the context of what can you do given all of that. That was never sort of the starting point. It was always, do you want to try this activity? Do you want to do what your sisters are doing? Do you want to join the club your friends are in? And then maybe it was a bit about, well, what does that mean in terms of my health and how I manage that while I'm doing these things? So decisions were never framed in the context of you had neuroblastoma. And I think that was quite important in not defining me by neuroblastoma, having had neuroblastoma. That's not to say that having had neuroblastoma was irrelevant. It absolutely was, in that sometimes in doing the things I did growing up, I did find it more difficult, I think, because of the condition that I have to manage that is a direct result of the treatment. So a lot of the things I did despite that condition, and I wasn't constrained by it, but I did need to sort of overcome perhaps some additional challenges sometimes. But as I say, for the most part, I kind of progressed through the remaining years of school relatively incident-free, but with this kind of behavior around having to hide something, keep my head down and just not get noticed too much and make sure this condition wasn't discovered by other people. There was one other sort of late effect that did materialize while I was a teenager. I woke up one morning, age 15, with a really bad pain in my sort of lower right abdomen and didn't really know what it was. I just knew standing up really hurt. I had to stay in bed all day off school, not too bad. And then the next day it had gone away and I didn't think anything more of it. But my dad, who was a practicing pediatrician at the time, he's retired now, he did have a suspicion, and not for the first time. He sort of had clocked on that something might be going on here, and he started looking into it. And a few days later, he'd managed to find an ultrasound appointment for me, and I went in and got it checked out. And sure enough, I had kidney stones in my one remaining kidney. The other was removed during the surgery. And so that was a pretty urgent situation of clearly kidney stones are a threat to anyone. If you've only got the one kidney, it's an even bigger threat. So I went into surgery the next day, got the stones removed. Thankfully, that all went smoothly. And I did have one recurrence of those stones that didn't need surgical intervention. But later on, it sort of transpired that this seemed at the time to me to be a totally independent thing of having had neuroblastoma. I didn't connect it at all. But actually, the malabsorption because of my digestive condition that is a direct result of my treatment led to a substance called oxalate going through my kidney in sort of quantities more high than it would normally do. And the stones started to form from this substance called oxalate. So it's another late effect that for us, at least at the time, I don't think we saw that on the horizon as a family. I wasn't at that point in any kind of follow-up care anymore. The immediate period of follow-up had finished. I wasn't in a long-term follow-up care clinic. So it's fortunate, again, not for the first time, that my dad had an area of expertise that was relevant to this and could kind of identify what was going on. So I think the importance of long-term follow-up care, which I'll come back to, definitely stands out in that example. And looking back, I think, I realized how lucky I was in that situation. So that condition doesn't really affect me so much day to day, the kidney stones. I take some medication to try and prevent the risk of them forming again. There were some dietary changes as well to reduce intake of the substance that formed those stones. But day to day, it sort of remained my digestive condition that is the main sort of mark of the cancer treatment that I had that stands out day to day. And then after school, I took a gap year and traveled a little bit. Almost certainly I didn't travel as much as I would have done if I wasn't concerned about managing my health whilst being away. And there are a few of those examples, I think, where whilst I can confidently say I don't feel defined by neuroblastoma, there are things that I perhaps haven't done or didn't do as wholeheartedly as I could if it weren't for the fact that I had this condition. But it was a really important step in me discovering that I could go out into the world and exist independently and perhaps take some of these risks of being away from home, being away from that familiar setting with a condition like the one I've got, and get by and be all right. And maybe there were some tricky situations, but on the whole, it was fine and I had a good time. And so then it was on to university. And again, it did come up here, the fact that, or the effect of my treatment. I was really keen that I needed a private bathroom while I was at university for obvious reasons, given my condition. But the only rooms in the university halls that had those private bathrooms were away from all the other freshers. And so there was sort of a reminder perhaps of having something about me that was a bit different to other people, something that needed slightly different treatment or management. Luckily, I kind of got adopted by some other students there on the freshers block, and they made me an honorary member of their corridor, and it was all fine from that point. But it did sort of stand out again as another little example of there's something that you have to manage that perhaps other people don't. Then I went on to study a master's, and that included a series of work placements. And this was really the first test for me of how would I fare in a kind of full-time job setting. And I don't think I'd really noticed up until that point that had been in the back of my mind as a question of could I actually do that, given the health condition, given the fact that although I've done all right through school, I have had to have time off. It has affected me. Could I hold down that full-time job? And luckily, it looks like it was going to be all right. I took part in these work placements and didn't tend to need time off because of my health condition too often. I seemed to do an all right job with the people I was working for. And so since then, I kind of went into the world of work and did various odd jobs to begin with. I worked in comms. I was selling event space for a bit. I was a cheesemonger even for a short while. And then eventually got a job that was a bit more steady And then in recent years, I've been working for a management consultancy. I live and work here in London, and things feel pretty stable on that front these days. So I've sort of done lots of different things, and I'm really proud of a lot of the things that I have done. And so in that sense, neuroblastoma has not defined me. But until relatively recently, at least, and probably still to an extent, it's all involved an element of trying to sort of just keep my condition under wraps a bit. I've not tended to bring it up as something that I talk to people about very openly, and try and keep it hidden if I can. And I think there are knock-on effects of sort of being in that mindset for so many years, having that kind of single worry or that single dominant worry going into any kind of new situation or any social situation, that it might play up, it might cause problems. Other people might realize that that's happening and judge me for it. And it's just consumed a lot of mental energy over the years. So more recently, what's happened is I've sort of taken a bit of time to properly look back and try and process all of that and understand what the impact of that has been on me. I think at the time I had sort of adopted behaviors that I needed to get through going to school, get through whatever else I was taking part in, and be able to do the various things I did, and still make some really good friends along the way and have really good experiences. But I think in some cases, those behaviors don't serve me so well anymore, and perhaps hold me back in some respects. And so doing this work, which has been with a therapist, a professional who can sort of guide me through that process, and is, I think, crucially, totally impartial and emotionally separate from, the experience my family went through, from experiences friends have been through with me over the years. That's been hugely helpful, and it feels like a very sort of positive, optimistic thing to be doing. And although I've got better at managing my condition and the late effects of my treatment over the years, using medication and perhaps managing a bit around what I eat as well, it does still play up. It's still not perfect, and I don't know that it ever will be. It's a very sort of temperamental condition. But by putting a bit more time into understanding the emotional and the psychosocial impacts of it, it seems as though I'm starting to be able to take a bit more ownership of my health and my well-being, put down some of the burden of worrying about what other people's reactions are going to be, and perhaps a bit more proactively asking for or just taking what I need to look after myself, whether that's time off work, whether that's just taking myself out of a situation when I need to. And I think in doing all of that, it's letting more of myself through, and I can be a bit more authentic in how I'm living, feeling a bit more in control and less like I need to do the various kind of mental gymnastics and social maneuvering to avoid being found out, which is a huge change from kind of where I was all those years ago. But it takes time, and it's an ongoing process for me. But I've already sort of seen huge changes from it, and a big part of that has been getting more involved in the patient advocacy and learning more about childhood cancer and late effects of childhood cancer, not just for me, but for the many other survivors that are out there. And it's fantastic to be here as part of this event in that context. So I think to sort of start concluding my story, I've definitely not been defined by neuroblastoma. I've said it a few times, but I think it bears repeating. I'm really confident that's the case. And I hope for anyone perhaps that's at a slightly earlier stage of their journey, that's a hopeful message. I've done so many things that have been great to do, great experiences that have nothing to do with having had neuroblastoma. And I've done them despite some of the late effects that I live with. And part of that, I think, was this point of not starting from a position of, well, you had neuroblastoma, you were very ill, and therefore everything we do has to be in the context of that. By the same token, I think acknowledging the condition that I live with and the impacts it's had on me has been hugely important for me, to just acknowledge that it did make some things more difficult. I did those things, I did them despite my condition, but to just pause and realize that it was a bit harder for me perhaps than it would have been has been a really important step. And so late effects of cancer treatment, and particularly neuroblastoma treatment, perhaps, can and do arise. And for me, those late effects have been more significant than having neuroblastoma itself, even if that's not the case for perhaps the people that were around me at the time. And I think good long-term follow-up care has to be a really crucial part of surviving and thriving after neuroblastoma. That point at which I had those kidney stones, I was just lucky at that point that my dad could figure out what was going on. If I'd been in long-term follow-up care, and I think there's more of it around now, although there's further to go, that is more likely to have been picked up or been seen as something that could come, on the horizon and been looked out for. And sort of with that in mind, this year I joined the board of a charity called PanCare, who work to improve provision and quality of long-term follow-up care for childhood cancer survivors across Europe. There's enormous inequality between countries, but there's also real patchiness within countries. And so PanCare published guidelines and work with healthcare practitioners to just try and increase awareness and understanding of long-term follow-up care and late effects of childhood cancer. Working with healthcare providers, healthcare practitioners, but also parents and survivors. And on that note, we'll hopefully soon be publishing a series of plain language brochures on late effects on the PanCare website that are aimed at parents and survivors and set out, some of the late effects that can arise, not with the aim of trying to sort of scare people, but just equip you with the knowledge of what can come up and what to look for and what questions to ask your GP or your long-term follow-up care provider. And it's not just the physical impacts for me that need looking out for. It's the social, the psychological effects as well. That's been a huge transition for me, perhaps, and perhaps was the bit that wasn't there so much during childhood, and that I've done a bit more of kind of off my own back in adulthood. So if there's one thing that perhaps I would have changed, it's having more of that support earlier on. And I think these days there is more of that, but there's definitely more to do. So with that kind of support in place, with long-term follow-up care, paying attention to the psychosocial impacts and emotional impacts of childhood cancer and the late effects that can arise, I think anyone can thrive after neuroblastoma, not be defined by it. But there will be stuff to manage. There will be some difficulties on the way, but there is a lot to take hold of and run at. And with that, I'll hand back to Hayley, I think.
Thank you so much, Tom. That's just incredible. I wish we had more time for you, and I know that I'm going to wish that we have more time for Tessa. So thank you for your incredible story. But I do want to introduce Tessa because we do have a very short space of time. So Tessa Watterson is a neuroblastoma survivor diagnosed in 1962 from Australia, and she's a retired registered nurse and midwife for 32 years. She's gotten up at 5 o'clock this morning to be with us, so I feel very privileged and lucky. Good morning, Tessa.
Good morning, everybody. Now I'm just trying to get this screen up. Oh, it's going to play up on me. Just let me... How do I get this going? Chrome. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Okay. Where do I start? One of my first memories of treatment for my neuroblastoma was how much it tickled when my stomach was being painted with the dye to aim my radiotherapy. And it was such a beautiful colour. I was born in February 1959 and I was a big baby, 8 pound 3, and reached most of my milestones in my early infancy and was a little slow to walk, but by 16 months, Mum said I was toddling around and everything was going well. I was the second daughter to my mum and dad, and this photo is my grandmother and my older sister. When I was about 18 months, these photos are when I was about 18 months old. But soon after my 3rd birthday, Mum and Dad noticed some abnormalities. I was pale, sweated a lot, and I would complain that I had a sore back and had some dark circles under my eyes. I was taken to my GP quite quickly, and it was discovered that I had a large lump in my belly. So I quickly was taken and had surgery to try and remove this growth. When they found out that it was a neuroblastoma, unfortunately, it was not able to be removed because of involvement of my spinal nerves and the nerves of my leg. Soon after that, I started my radiotherapy. This is a photo of my sisters. By this stage, Mum had I had a younger sister, Becky, and this photo was when I'd had chemotherapy, and I can already see some changes in the shape of my body. And consequently, this was the last time that I was taller than my younger sister. Growth became a bit of an issue. I was never meant to be tall, but I think as a consequence of treatments, I'm quite small stature. I did manage to reach 4'10". My aim was always to be 5 foot, but never mind. Being short is fine. I was on oral tablets for chemo, as well as some direct chemotherapy to my tumour, and things seemed to go on quite well. When I was about 5 or 5, they decided that let's see if we can remove this tumour now that it has been shrunk by radiotherapy, etc. And during this time, I was being followed up at a unit called the Special Unit, which was attached to the Prince of Wales Hospital in Randwick. I'd been going there to see my oncologist during this time, and it's where I received my chemotherapy. So just before my 6th birthday, I was admitted to the Special Unit to have about 10-day stay to try and attempt to remove this tumour. Unfortunately, that was still not possible, and I sort of developed a number of postnatal complications, post-op complications. And this stay in hospital, which was meant to be about 10 days, turned out to be over 100 days. And during that time, I'm sure it was really difficult for my parents. By this stage, I had a brother, so there was 4 of us. Dad was transferred with his job to Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and the aim was for us all to travel with him. But unfortunately, because of the complications, I had to remain in hospital. So it must have been really difficult for Mum and Dad, because Dad had to travel to his job, and Mum was staying here with us. Some months later, I improved, and we, as a family with Mum and my brothers and sisters, we went to Malaysia. These are some photos just from when I was in Malaysia. It became evident Mum would try and hem my dresses and could never seem to get my hems even. And this is when it was first noticed that I had quite a significant curve in my spine, and tended to walk up on my toes. Apart from that, I gained strength every day, but I entered in my early primary school, entered what I call my plaster of Paris period, where I had a number of operations on my legs, feet, and spent long times in plaster of Paris to try and improve my walking gait, and to get my heels down on the ground. It was quite hot in the tropics, And I remember sticking knitting needles down my plasters to scratch the itchy parts of my legs. While I was in the special unit for that lengthy time, unfortunately, Mum was a long way away, and it was a unit that was specifically for cancer patients. But I happened to be the only child during those 100 days. And it really had a big effect on me and my future going forward. But for some reason, I thought I lived at the hospital, and that for some reason, that's where I was to stay. So when I eventually did go home, I was surprised that they let me out. The nursing staff at the special unit were an amazing group of women at the time. And even the patients, when Mum left, I remember being devastated and really sad because I was lonely and couldn't really understand why I had to stay there. The patients were amazing, and at this stage, I wanted to be a nurse. I wanted to be like the women that had looked after me. This was Christmas in Malaysia, and I got my first nurse's outfit, and I was so proud of it. All I ever wanted to do was nursing, but at the time, nursing was done through training hospitals. I really wanted to do my training at Prince of Wales because to me, it was the best place to go. And I did start my training after many attempts at different hospitals, and it was probably my proudest time. These photos were some that I dragged out of the archives, and I just loved every minute of my job. At the end of my training, though, I was having increasing leg pain and had some investigations done, which resulted in some major surgeries about to do with my spine, really. The tumour had been encroaching and now encasing a number of my my circulation and the nerves of my spine. So as a result of those operations, I was in, yet again, some plaster of Paris, but this time my whole body was in a cast. And then I went into a hard plastic brace. Where I worked at Prince of Wales and Prince Henry, they were amazing to me. And I actually went back to work taking blood when I was still in my brace. Following this, some of the other early complications for me really were the fact that during puberty, well, I never really reached puberty and had some investigations that showed that I would never be able to have children. This was probably one of the hardest long-term effects that affected me greatly and caused me a lot of sadness. I'd always been really maternal growing up, and by this stage I was one of six children, and probably the hardest was when my friends and family began to start their families. So in 1984, I became a midwife. This was such a wonderful career for me. It allowed me to use all my maternal skills in the middle of the night, and to such a privilege to be able to help families as they were growing. I was also lucky enough that because of my background, I've been with all of my sisters when all of their children have been born, and it has been such a privilege to be able to be assistance to them. Doing midwifery, some people would ask, because I couldn't have children, that it was probably harmful to me to work with so many babies, but I think it was the best thing that I could have done. I kept working until I was about 50, but my spinal issues, my back issues were starting to cause me some great problems. And the other long-term effect that I've had is difficulty controlling my blood pressure. My tumour is still there, but is now classed as a benign ganglioneuroma. And as I've grown into adulthood, it has been difficult for long-term follow-up. I've been lucky enough to have an excellent GP, and if I would see someone with a problem, they would see this large mass on a CAT scan, and all bells and whistles would ring, and people would panic until they would listen that it wasn't something new. It's been there for all of my life. I'm still short. This is a photo of my sisters and my mum, taken in about 2016, and they have been a great support to me throughout my life, including my brothers. With the emergence of the internet, before this, I felt quite lonely growing up. I'd never met anybody that had a neuroblastoma before. And with the inception of the internet, I started to look and started to connect with other survivors through Facebook, etc., etc. And I came across an organisation here in Australia called Neuroblastoma Australia. Every year they run a Run to Cure, and these are some photos of our first attempt with my mum and I, and a beautiful view of Sydney skyline. It was a great day, and it really made me feel at home. I got to meet children that were undergoing treatments, and it's the first time that I really felt that I belonged to a group. Run to Cure became a big thing for our family. More and more of my family joined me in our walks. Well, mine was a walk, but my sisters and niece in this photo, and mum at one of the runs to Cure. During COVID, because we couldn't all get together for the Run to Cure, Mum and I and my little dog Fergus, we did Run to Cure local. By this stage, it's become quite difficult for me to walk due to my back issues. So I'm on a little scooter, and Fergus, my dog, did the 3-kilometre run for me, and he was very proud of himself. I could never have done what I've done without my loving family. This was the last photo taken of all 6 of us with Mum and Dad. Dad passed away about 6 years ago, and has been sadly missed. In Australia, Neuroblastoma Australia celebrate Neuroblastoma Awareness Day here on the 2nd of February. And ironically, and I'm very chuffed to say, the 2nd of February is actually my birthday. So I feel very honoured to have that day to celebrate, but also to raise much needed funds for neuroblastoma research and psychosocial. My biggest problems as I've aged are not all related to neuroblastoma, although many are. One of my biggest problems has been managing high blood pressure since childhood. It's been a difficult journey at times, but I did lots of things growing up. I did dancing. I was never going to be a prima ballerina because I was a little crooked, but I'm sure that those activities, I swam, I snorkeled, I rode motorbikes through the bush, lots of things before my back became a real issue. but as a result of the blood pressure, my kidneys are not travelling as well as they could be, but I'm still holding my own and living here with my mum, who I'm forever grateful for, because without my parents, I can only imagine how difficult that was for them. And hopefully things have changed since looking at through a neuroblastoma journey through the lens of the 1960s. I'd just like to thank everyone for organising this, and it's been lovely to be here with you all, and I wish you all the best with your children and your journeys through what could be a really difficult time. Thank you.
Wow. Tessa, thank you so much. That was incredible. And thank you for being open. Both of you, I've got nothing but respect. I think it's very brave to tell your stories, both of you. And as a parent, I mean, my daughter's only 11, but you both just gave me so much hope. Like, you know, there's going to be issues, but actually there's a life to be lived, a good life. So thank you. And I hope that resonates with the parents watching as well. We've got maybe about 5 minutes. So I'm going to just very quick whistle stop tour of some questions coming in. I really wish I had longer with you both. Quite an easy one. Do you like the word survivor? Do you mind being called a survivor, Tom?
I hadn't really come across the word until last year, so it's not something I've kind of called myself at all until recently. It still feels a bit funny to use it, I'll be honest. It doesn't sit quite properly with me, but for lack of any other word, I don't mind it. I find if I do call myself a survivor, it's still, I'm a survivor. I don't say it with a straight face.
Okay. Tessa, how about you?
Similar to Tom, it's something that you try and hide for a long time. When I was growing up, like with Tom, I didn't like to look different than everybody else. And but survivor, I suppose there's no other real word. Maybe, yeah, it doesn't really bother me. I just go with it.
Okay, thank you. I mean, it must be difficult because survivor, we're talking about defining you, and I suppose you're so much more than a survivor, so it's hard. Okay, nice milestones. So I think that means like 10 years cancer free, 20 years cancer free. Do you do that?
No, I don't do that.
No.
Okay.
Sure, that was easy. Okay, thanks. So do you ever resent the fact that this happened? And I guess off the back of that, a question that we've spoken about in parent groups is, do you resent the fact that your parents signed consent for your treatment and therefore you have all of these side effects, but that wasn't your decision? It's a very difficult question. Tessa, let's start with you.
No, I don't have any regrets at all. My parents did what they were being advised to do. It was quite unknown back in the 60s. So they just did what the doctors suggested. And I have no regrets on that, because the prognosis when I was first diagnosed was very poor. So whatever was done has got me to here today. So I'm forever grateful and don't resent any of it.
Love that. Thanks, Tessa. And Tom?
Yeah, I definitely don't resent parents for signing consent forms or anything like that. I think very similar to Tessa, like they did what they were advised, and it did ultimately, keep me alive. As a child, I definitely resented the fact that it had happened at all, and that I was then left with the late effects I had. Very strongly, I think for quite a long time, I resented that. That has changed. I think I now sort of accept it as a fact. It happened. That's that. It's more, how I deal with it now and how I manage it. And I don't think the resentment helps, but it's taken a long time, I think, to let go of that. It definitely was there.
Yeah. Yes, I agree, Tom. I used to think, why me? But I learnt that there are people a lot worse off
Yeah.
And you know, it is what it is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you both. So a comment and a question. You're both so inspirational. You've demonstrated spinning a relatively negative matter into such a positive outcome and outlook. Is it easier to maintain a positive outlook now in hindsight, or have you always been positive people? So I think you both just answered that, but yeah, Tessa, does it come with time or a lot of work and self-development?
It is. I think when I was a child, it was difficult. There was very little psychosocial supports. I did see a psychologist as I entered adulthood, and that has really helped me to put neuroblastoma in its little spot. And not every condition or every illness that I get is necessarily related. There are some age-related changes. And I think growing up, it was almost any problem I had, doctors would immediately look to the neuroblastoma, but it wasn't necessarily part of that. But I maintained really quite good health, better than some of my siblings. I never got colds and I was lucky not to miss much school. But yeah, I think psychosocial issues, and that's what Tom is doing, is amazing, because there is a gap when you get to adulthood. Which doctors do I see? And every time I'd have to go and explain my story to someone new or a new doctor, everyone's arms would fly up and think, oh, we've got to do something. There's this massive tumour. But once they get the full story, it's you just keep on keeping on. And I've become quite attached to my tumour now. I think of it as an extra organ in my body.
Love that. Great. So positive. Tom, did you have anything to add?
Well, I think, yeah, similar to the resentment thing, I don't think I was particularly positive about it, to be honest. As a child, I think I was quite angry about it, and exactly what you said, Tessa. I thought, why me? And I felt like the world is very unfair to me. And you get perspective, I suppose, as you grow up, and like you say, you see that actually I'm hugely privileged in a lot of ways, and other people have a much tougher time. So, not that it should all necessarily be measured by that, but yeah, I've let go of some of that negativity. And I think as I've learnt to manage my condition a bit better, and also, definitely doing a lot of that psychosocial work, working with a therapist as an adult. And I do think there was room for there to have been more of that for me at a younger age. And I think there is perhaps a bit more of it these days, but perhaps room for even more. But that's helped enormously to sort of look at it slightly differently and let go of some of that resentment and negativity, which is definitely a good thing.
Absolutely. Tom and Tessa, I could spend hours with you both, but that is all we've got time for. I'm so sorry, but we have reached into this session. Thank you both for being so honest and open and sharing your stories and being here today. We're really grateful. I've come away very moved and uplifted, and I think a lot of other parents will too.
Thanks, Hayley. Thanks. See you, Tom. Bye all.
Bye-bye.
Remember, if you miss a session, it will be available to watch on demand right here on the event platform. Up next, straight after this session at 1900 hours GMT, we have the closing session where we'll hear a roundup from Dr. Morgenstern.